At 9:47 on January 14th, 2026, in the freezing waters west of Greenland, a bright red marker suddenly lit up the monitoring screen at Pituffik Space Base. A 33,000-ton Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker, Arctica, was cutting through the ice deep inside Greenland's exclusive economic zone, only 18 kilometers from the capital, Nuuk. This was seen as a direct violation of sovereignty and a clear challenge to NATO's position in the Arctic. Within moments, 2 Danish F-35 fighter jets were scrambled from Thule Air Base to intercept. But as they closed to within 50 kilometers of the target, both aircraft lost satellite navigation at the exact same time. Russia's Murmansk BN electronic warfare system had gone active, creating a dense jamming zone with a radius of roughly 100 kilometers. In an instant, some of the world's most advanced fighter jets were left effectively blind in the Arctic sky, and that was only the beginning. The real setup was even more dangerous, and only one force had the ability to turn the situation around. A shadowy presence neither side had fully accounted for. But before we get to the most intense Arctic standoff of 2026, it is worth stepping back to understand Moscow's strategy. From a geopolitical point of view, Russia's move was highly calculated. It was designed to solve several strategic problems at once. Moscow chose a particularly sensitive moment, just ahead of February 2026, when President Trump was expected to reduce NATO funding. By turning the Greenland Sea into something resembling Crimea 2.0, Russia appeared to be testing a gray zone strategy, bending international law for military advantage while also showcasing the capabilities of its Yasen-M submarine technology to a key partner, China. Yet the most important objective may have been this: blocking the American plan to upgrade the Golden Dome radar system at Pituffik. Russia wanted to send a message that if the United States moved forward with a stronger missile shield, the Arctic could quickly become an active pressure point right on America's doorstep. Back on the scene, the failure of the F-35 response forced NATO to shift tactics immediately. By chance, the Royal Navy's Type 26 frigate, HMS Glasgow, was already conducting exercises off the coast of Nuuk. One of the most advanced anti-submarine warships in the West, it was equipped with the Type 2-087 passive sonar system, a platform so sensitive it was often described as capable of detecting even the faintest underwater signatures from long range. Once the emergency order came through, Glasgow turned hard, increased speed, and headed straight for the disputed zone to fill the gap left by the air response. Then came the first underwater contact. When the ship's sonar picked up an echo at a distance of 8 kilometers, the British commander chose to carry out a warning maneuver under the rules of engagement. A Mark 54 lightweight torpedo in non-explosive warning mode was launched into the water, intended to create a powerful acoustic signal and push the opposing force away without escalating further. But NATO had badly underestimated how prepared Russia was. The moment the Mark 54 left the tube, alarms erupted aboard HMS Glasgow. Torpedo in the water, bearing 000. And it was not coming from the surface vessel Arctica. It came from 150 meters below. A Yasen-M class nuclear attack submarine, Kazan, one of the Northern Fleet's most advanced undersea platforms, had apparently been waiting there the entire time. Its captain did not wait for instructions from Moscow. He responded immediately, following a direct tit-for-tat logic. A heavy 53 to 65,000 torpedo was launched. Its main warhead was not fully engaged, but it was programmed for a proximity detonation at close range. Seconds later, the ocean erupted. A column of water nearly 30 meters high surged up just 400 meters in front of HMS Glasgow. The underwater pressure from the Russian torpedo was far greater than the British warning shot, creating a massive wall of water that slammed into the ship's bow. The result was devastating for the vessel's sensor suite. The composite sonar dome at the front of HMS Glasgow was shattered. Britain's newest warship was suddenly left blind beneath the surface, drifting without its primary anti-submarine capability. In practical terms, the pride of the Royal Navy had become a sitting target at sea, while the source of the threat remained hidden. For NATO, the situation quickly shifted from serious to critical. As soon as HMS Glasgow was effectively neutralized, maritime radar picked up 3 more contacts approaching from the north. These were Project 22,100 Okean-class border patrol ships operated by Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB. 90 meters long and moving in a horizontal line, they positioned themselves directly across the British ship's route toward Nuuk Harbor. Legally, it was a clever move, because these FSB vessels were officially registered as law enforcement ships rather than naval combatants. NATO warships faced major restrictions in how they could respond. Under maritime collision regulations, aggressive action against law enforcement vessels on duty could create immediate legal and political complications. Meanwhile, the real threat remained below the surface. The Kazan continued to move silently at a depth of 150 meters, a tactically ideal layer in Arctic waters. It was operating just below the thermocline, where changes in temperature and salinity create a natural acoustic barrier. In this environment, sonar waves from NATO systems can bend and reflect upward instead of reaching deeper layers. To NATO's remaining sensors, the submarine had effectively disappeared. So now the picture was clear. British forces were blocked on the surface, Russian submarines were concealed underwater, and the skies were disrupted by electronic jamming. At that moment, the advantage appeared to be firmly with Moscow. Now put yourself in the position of the NATO admiral. If no one arrived to help, what would you do? Option A, launch a full-scale response and accept the enormous global risk to protect the British ship. Or option B, pull back, absorb the humiliation, and allow Russia to turn this stretch of sea into its own sphere of control. Write A or B in the comments below. Now let's look at how the Americans handled this extremely delicate situation. From a distance, Washington had been watching the entire confrontation unfold. At this point, Russia's actions no longer looked like a gray zone dispute. In American eyes, this had crossed into a direct attack on Allied military equipment. At nearby Patuxent Space Base, U.S. technicians quietly powered up a new generation over-the-horizon radar system. And that was when the next phase began. Unlike conventional radar systems, which are limited by the horizon and vulnerable to local interference, REL-6 used the ionosphere to scan the ocean surface at ranges of up to 3,000 kilometers. Even more importantly, the system had been upgraded with an AI-based signal processing algorithm capable of filtering out heavy background noise with remarkable precision. It was designed to detect even the slightest disturbance on the water's surface, whether from a snorkel or from pressure shifts caused by a 13,000-ton submarine moving deep below. Data from Patuxent was sent through a secure very low frequency, or VLF, link, one of the few communication methods capable of pushing through Russian electronic jamming. Despite the thermocline and despite its underwater stealth, the Kazan began to reveal itself on American radar screens as a long scar-like disturbance across the ocean surface at coordinates 72 degrees 16 minutes north, 55 degrees 32 minutes west, with an estimated depth of 220 meters. That target data was immediately passed to a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon, which launched from Thule using an inertial navigation system, allowing it to operate without depending on GPS, which was already being disrupted. Now the hunt had truly begun. Once the Poseidon received the target coordinates, it did not rush into a direct strike. The crew understood that Kazan was a highly capable opponent, and what they needed was not just a tactical move, but a decisive psychological advantage. Instead of scattering sonar buoys randomly, the P-8A deployed 88 A-size active sonar buoys in a checkerboard formation, building a 20 by 20 kilometer anti-submarine containment zone around Kazan's last known position. These buoys began emitting multi-static sonar pulses from multiple directions at once, cutting through the water layers and stripping away much of the submarine's stealth advantage. As soon as the aircraft's combat system confirmed a lock, the weapons bay opened. A heavyweight Mark 48 AD cap torpedo dropped. But this was where the tactic became especially striking. The torpedo was wire-guided, making it resistant to acoustic interference. From the aircraft, a weapons officer directly guided it as it descended toward 220 meters at 55 knots. Yet instead of striking the Kazan, the Mark 48 approached at high speed and then turned away at the very last moment, passing the Russian submarine at a distance of less than 50 meters. The sound of its propulsion system echoed through the hull like a message no submariner could misunderstand. We know exactly where you are, and we can reach you whenever we choose. Still, the captain of the Kazan was not inexperienced. Inside the command compartment, instead of ordering the submarine to surface, he clenched his jaw and initiated emergency evasion. Almost immediately, the submarine released 12 MG-74 hydroacoustic decoys. These were not simple noisemakers. They were advanced countermeasure devices capable of imitating engine signatures, propeller frequencies, and even the reflected acoustic profile of a Yasen-class nuclear submarine. In seconds, the Poseidon's combat display, which had shown a single contact, was suddenly flooded with 13 red markers moving in different directions. At the same time, Kazan made a hard turn, powered down its engines, and drifted silently into a trench on the seabed, attempting to disappear into the natural seismic noise of the ocean floor. Russia was now directly challenging America's ability to separate real targets from false ones. Above the water, the American crew faced a moment of uncertainty as the AI system struggled under the volume of deceptive returns. If they pursued a decoy, Kazan could slip away, and the entire encounter could swing back in Russia's favor. But the American command had anticipated exactly this kind of response. So they turned to something much harder to fool: physics. The P-8A descended to just 60 meters above the waves, an extremely risky maneuver in blizzard conditions, and the crew activated the MAD system, the magnetic anomaly detector mounted at the rear of the aircraft. No matter how advanced the Russian decoys were, they were still relatively small objects. Kazan, on the other hand, was a 13,000-ton mass of reinforced steel. Even operating in silence, even concealed as carefully as possible, it still distorted the Earth's magnetic field simply by existing beneath the water. Then the call came. Massive magnetic anomaly detected, bearing 300. Real target confirmed. Kazan's hiding place had been exposed. This time, the Americans did not use a torpedo. Instead, they dropped a small device known as a SUS charge, an underwater signaling charge directly above the submarine. It produced a violent acoustic shockwave comparable to a grenade-like blast in the water right next to the hull. Inside the Kazan, the effect was immediate and terrifying. The shockwave thundered through the submarine, shaking the entire vessel and temporarily overwhelming its sonar systems. Electronics were rattled, crew orientation was disrupted, and in the dangerous terrain of the deep Arctic seafloor, the submarine could no longer safely remain hidden. At that point, the Russian captain understood the reality of the situation. If they stayed below, they risked colliding with underwater rock formations in the darkness and confusion. The contest was over. The pride of the Northern Fleet had been outmatched by a combination of detection technology, layered tactics, and relentless pressure. With no safe alternative left, the captain ordered an emergency blow, forcing high-pressure air into the ballast tanks to bring the submarine to the surface. At 10:45, the frozen sea cracked open. The dark hull of the Yasen submarine rose into view in the middle of Denmark's exclusive economic zone, fully exposed in daylight. For a nuclear submarine to be forced to surface in hostile waters was not just a tactical defeat. It was a profound humiliation and clear evidence that Russia had crossed into disputed territory. Once their undersea cover was gone, the icebreaker Arctica and the 3 FSB patrol ships also turned back and withdrew toward Russian waters. In Brussels, NATO officials could finally breathe again. The confrontation had ended, but the aftermath raised difficult questions for everyone involved. Russia had gathered valuable data on NATO's reaction speed and coordination. HMS Glasgow had to be towed back for repairs costing millions of pounds. Europe was reminded just how dependent its security posture remained on high-end American technical support. And on the U.S. side, even with the tactical success, the Pentagon understood that some of the capabilities behind Pituffik's over-the-horizon radar and its anti-submarine response methods had now been partially revealed. In other words, this was not the end of the game. It was the beginning of a new and even more complex chapter in the Arctic. So what do you think? Was revealing the over-the-horizon radar capability to protect Allied forces a brilliant move? Or a long-term strategic mistake? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update on the global strategic landscape. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.